Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to the Real Estate Trading Services during a Public Health Emergency webinar, which is the longest title of any webinar we put on this year and probably the largest audience. My name is Marty Douglas, and I'm one of 3 professional standards advisors here at the Real Estate Council. I'd like to welcome my co-presenter, Jennifer Lynch, Manager of Professional Services for the British Columbia Real Estate Association. Jennifer is also a past president of the British Columbia Real Estate Association, a past president of the Vancouver Island Real Estate Board. She served the Real Estate Council of BC in several capacities, and until recently was the managing broker of a very successful brokerage on Gabriola Island. Welcome, Jennifer. I'd also like to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedule in this hectic situation to join us for today's webinar. We recognize that this is a very stressful time for everyone, and we are doing our best to support you, to support your licensees and your clients by providing guidance and information through our COVID-19 website. I encourage you to visit the site regularly as we're providing frequent updates, almost daily updates to the checklist for professionals and frequently asked questions for consumers, among other resources. And we are directing consumers to that same resource. So you want to keep pace with your client. As we're all adapting to rather extraordinary circumstances during the pandemic and practicing physical distancing, I'd ask for your understanding if anything goes awry with this morning's webinar. We are recording it, so you can share it with your peers and those who couldn't attend. The offices of the Real Estate Council are currently closed. However, our staff are all working from home, and we continue to be available to support you via telephone and email. In this webinar, our goal is to connect you to your peers and share best practices and hear from you about what has been working as we navigate these tumultuous times. Before we open it up to hear from you and take your questions and listen to your scenarios, I want to share some of what we've been hearing in the past couple of weeks as you navigate COVID-19. Many of you have had questions about the uncertainty regarding tenanted properties, and the residential tenancy branch has provided clarity on this recently, as you may have seen in an email from us this morning at 9:30. We encourage you to visit the residential tenancy branch website for more information. Regarding the knowledge base, I appreciate that some of you have concerns about the knowledge base and the new site. It can be challenging to find information you're looking for, and I can assure you that we professional standards advisors are racing only minutes ahead of you to find the same thing as we are faced with similar challenges, only we have to do it on the fly. I want to assure you that our tech people and our contractors are working on refining and improving this important part of our website. I also want to reiterate, we're still in a period of transition, and the Professional Standards Manual and the Brokerage Standards Manual are being revised into a series of guidelines that are being written and will be posted on the site in the coming weeks and months. If you have particular issues that you used to be able to find in the PSM or in the Brokerage Standards Manual and now you're at a loss, I suggest you give one of the professional standards advisors a call. We probably have been there and know and can give you some guidance on best practices for searching for items like that. A little about public safety. Real estate services have been included among the province's essential services. But while that is true, you have to follow the orders and guidance provided by the provincial health officer in order to ensure safe operations. We've heard from the public concerns about real estate professionals canvassing or door knocking for buying and selling opportunities during the pandemic. This may not be the time to go door knocking, especially masked, as one licensee discovered just as recently as Monday. So I would encourage you to discuss prospecting and similar activities with your licensees and weigh the positive versus the potential negative consequences. We've been hearing concerns from tenants about real estate professionals conducting showings. I want to remind everyone about our position that there should be no open houses. In-person showings are also a concern, and we encourage you to look for alternatives. Residents are informed and have become so since last week's municipal affairs announcement, and we encourage you to visit the Residential Tenancy Branch's website for new information for tenants, landlords, and real estate practitioners. As professional standards advisors on a daily basis, we are fielding a tremendous number of calls from the consumer particularly, and from licensees. Licensees in part are asking questions like, I'm considering turning in my license. I have some deals that I wrote. Will I get paid for them? We're also getting a lot of questions regarding COVID clauses being inserted in contracts. Are they legal? Are they appropriate? Will the council draft a clause that's appropriate for use? The fast answer for that is no, and I think we'll have more discussion about that within the hour. So now I'd like to turn it over to Jennifer. Jen, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been hearing at BCREA from professionals on these topics right now?
Absolutely. Thanks, Marty, for the invitation to participate in today's webinar and for the ongoing dialogue that Council's been having with BCREA in regards to COVID-19. BCREA would also like to echo the comments of Marty and the Real Estate Council in recognizing the intense pressure that managing brokers, realtors, and their clients are facing in real estate right now as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. BCREA, as your professional association, do not have the authority to restrict trading services. That's up to the provincial health officer and the regulator. However, we put out recommendations such as asking realtors to contemplate temporarily not providing trading services that require personal interactions, and that includes showings and open houses. The best practice to help spread COVID-19 is by self-isolating and social distancing, and we're really trying to encourage managing brokers and realtors to consider the health and safety of yourself, your families, your clients, your colleagues, and preventing our healthcare system from being overwhelmed. In this unprecedented time for managing brokers, you're tasked with providing leadership to realtors and helping them to assess risks, including reputational, physical, transactional, and how this will inform their business practices. BCREA has been working hard in collaboration with the 11 real estate boards and building resources for managing brokers and realtors, and also has a portal on its website dedicated to COVID-19, which is updated as the information becomes available. There are many topics like you that we're dealing with on a daily basis. Some of the frequently asked questions we tried to create some resources on. So we have created a resource on COVID contracts and disclosures based on some of the great questions that we've heard coming in. We also have advocacy efforts happening to make sure that realtors and brokerages are considered in terms of financial assistance. We understand that this is a significant one for everyone. In addition, the implications definitely of the residential tenancy order to the existing and new transactions, that's come up, and we've been building resources around that this week. As well, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but COVID clauses and BCREA's position is much like council's in that we are not looking to create a COVID clause provincially. Today, really, this webinar is really about hearing from you. And so while I could go on for a long time about, sort of what BCREA is doing and some of our positions, what I'd like to do is turn it back to Marty so we can hear how best to support you and hopefully address some of the questions that you might have.
Thanks, Jen. We'd like to have this open the opportunity now for you so that we can hear how some of you have been navigating this situation, share your best practices, your solutions to problems, and around the topics that we've already discussed. In particularly, to kick things off, trying to keep it to a topic, and then we'll move on to another one. I'd like to start with your experiences with showing properties, and that would include what arrangements you were making with owners who are residents in that property and with tenants. Um, we will talk about COVID clauses because I anticipate that's going to be a question. So I'll turn it over to August. Who's waving their hand, August?
We have Dave. Dave, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
I'll wait. I've got a question, but it's not the topic Marty's got right now, so I'm okay.
Okay.
No issues with tenants, no issues with showing property, virtual tours being used, landlords being resistant, owners insisting they have to sell and what are you going to do about it? Owners saying, how come you're coming to my house so often? These are all things that we have dealt with in the last 2 days alone. So I'm sure you are looking at similar challenges in your office.
We've got a few people with their hands up at the moment.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mike, you're unmuted. You can go ahead. Sorry, Mike, we'll come back to you. Shannon, please go ahead. You're unmuted.
It seemed to be a mute issue.
I'm trying. Can you
Okay, who's that?
Can you
Shannon,
Shannon.
we can hear you.
Shannon, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I don't have a lot to say. I think the biggest thing that I'm more concerned about is, and I did send an email in, just trying to see if there's anybody that's got some paperwork or some things put together about how can I make a policy manual change to have at least some direction for my agents if they do choose to show homes or list. I mean, we're closed. We don't want any public in the office. Agents can go in. But when they start going out and about, the BC Real Estate Board, our board, BCNRB, sent out a email yesterday. It was a bit scary about the questions that we should be asking and clauses and forms and, you know, sellers allowing us to come in and signing consent forms. There's so much to know. If we put it in a snapshot, is there any idea from people out there that have put stuff together for their policy manuals of how agents should be performing their duties moving forward?
I'm going to defer to Jennifer on this, although the Real Estate Council has an internal policy manual for in the office. It deals with things like cleaning, extra cleaning of washrooms, areas that employees, not the public, touch, maintaining spatial distances. It doesn't apply to employees outside of the office. So Jennifer, you probably have better insight on that.
Absolutely. So we haven't done anything as an association to create any kind of policies, only because it would sort of be unique, I think, to each brokerage in terms of what policies they want to adapt and how they wish to proceed. BCREA has taken the position and made the recommendation that we think it's a best practice to limit face-to-face interactions or to look at other ways of doing that. So to create policies, it's a little bit tricky. There's definitely been a lot of talk about indemnity waivers, and there's a lot of them floating around, probably some of them better than others. At this time, we haven't looked at creating any indemnity waivers or anything like that, but there may be other people too, Marty, on the call who have adapted their policy manuals who might be able to share with Shannon or might be able to provide some additional resources there.
And I think you may find some clues or cut and paste material that you can steal from the provincial disease control center and the public health officer. Those links are on our website and I think on BCREA's website, information for licensees dealing with COVID-19, their best practices. Any other conversations to add to this? The question was around policy manuals, best practices, and also indemnity waivers.
Okay, Mike, I think you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Guys, this
Let me
is
just
Doug
say
Foles.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just best practices there with our realtors. We got a couple of things going on. One thing we're recommending is maybe a pre-sale inspection. That's an inspection done by the seller, not the buyer, that we can post online to minimize buyers coming through looking at things. The other things our realtors, one of our realtors was using FaceTime Live with the buyer going through the property. So it minimized people coming through, and those kind of things seem to help promote offers coming in without people going in there. So those are just a couple of things I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. I want to say something briefly about indemnity clauses. They are being circulated. I'm sure they're in use. I'm sure they've been recommended by your lawyer. If you're using one, you want to make sure that it's got a legal foundation. It's like any advice your lawyer provides you. You always take your lawyer's advice, assuming, and so you should use an indemnity clause if that's what's been recommended. However, from the council's point of view, we're talking about knowledgeable clients and informed consent. So I think it would be important to have a discussion with your buyer or seller client about the use of the indemnity clause and how it may impact the trading services that you're providing should a buyer or seller refuse to sign the indemnity clause. What position are you going to take? It could reduce the number of showings, could eliminate open houses. The seller's fine with all of that, then you're on your way. But I think you don't want to be looking down the road and hearing a seller saying, well, I didn't know you were blocking buyers because they wouldn't sign your indemnity clause. The questions that we've been asked about indemnity clauses have to do with what's in the client's best interest versus what's in the licensee's best interest. So I think you solve that problem by making sure the seller has informed consent. Any other questions, comments on COVID?
Marty, Mike
Showings.
actually didn't have a microphone, so that's what was happening. He did type out his question, so I'll read it out here. We have deals where the owner is moving into a unit and the tenant was given a 2-month notice to vacate prior to all these new regulations. The tenant is now refusing to leave. My owners are now homeless and living in an RV.
We had lengthy discussions with the government yesterday to clarify that point. If you look at the ministerial order that was issued, I think in support of the press release on the 25th of March, I think the effective date of the ministerial order is March 30th. No tenancy may be ended because of COVID, but in answer to the specific question, what about deals written before, in this case, the 30th of March, with appropriate notices to vacate, are they in force? And the answer is yes. However, as you're finding out in your case, should a tenant then refuse to move, they're not enforceable. They're legitimate notices, but when a tenant refuses to move, your alternative is to hire a bailiff, get an order from the residential tenancy branch. And the residential tenancy branch has been explicitly instructed by government not to force any evictions. So your client needs legal advice as to what their options are. The government recognizes that there are upstream and downstream complications, both sellers and buyers and tenants, I should say, that will be challenged in finding occupancy, but it is certainly beyond our jurisdiction to make any recommendations other than legal advice and to follow the residential tenancy branch orders. Look at their website. If your client's lawyer thinks that there's a chance, then the appropriate solution is probably a hearing with the residential tenancy branch over the issue. Okay. Let's go back to Dave Proctor.
Doug has a question. Doug, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
If a deal comes in now after the 30th and the tenant has agreed to move, you know, no eviction, but the landlord has talked to, or sorry, the seller has talked to them. They said, we're okay to move. We agree. Is that still okay? I just want to clarify that. Is that true?
Yes, thanks, Doug, for bringing that up. I should have mentioned that. If a tenant is agreeable and the landlord, purchaser, and tenant can reach an agreement, then that's entirely appropriate. And in actual fact, that's what the government's hope is, that through mutual communication and recognizing we're all in the same boat, just in different seats, that some accommodation will be found. That may take the place of financial compensation. It may take the place, take the form of an extended notice to vacate. In other words, instead of 2 months, perhaps longer, if the tenant feels comfortable in finding accommodation within a longer period of time and the buyer agrees. But any negotiation that's agreeable to all parties is appropriate.
And we have a question from Dave. Dave, please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Marty and Jennifer. Question I've got for you is, CBC or Sodders doing classroom sessions? I've got a new agent that's planning on coming on board, and he's got a session for next week, and he's asked me if you know how that's being handled for the classroom sessions.
I'm sorry, Dave, what's he got next week?
He's got a pre-licensing course, Marty.
Yeah.
And
Okay. On the council website, I believe under licensing, I can't look at it now, the examinations for the pre-licensing course have been canceled. I believe it was in April. The next one is in mid-June, and that will be subject to the crisis being over. All classroom in support of the applied course or in support of any of the requirements for renewing your license, all those classrooms are now going to be held online in this format. And details of that are available on our website if we're supporting the course. I think they're also available through UBC, where UBC is administering the program. Your licensee should have received information about that, about the alternative online classroom. That's what we're told anyways. An email was going to be sent out to all licensees.
no, he hasn't received anything.
Okay, well, then now the email address for education advisors escapes me at the present time. Dave, why don't I phone you after the fact and I'll give you the connection.
Or do you want my cell number, Marty?
Sure.
250-218-6814.
The email, I believe, is ce@recbc.ca.
Thank you. That's right. Continuing education, Dave. So that's the connection. ce@recbc.ca.
Perfect. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you, Sandra.
We have Kevin next. Kevin, please go ahead.
Hi, Kevin Reed from Vancouver Island Real Estate Board. Marty, for licensees that will require license renewal through this period, I just want to know if deadlines are being strictly adhered to. And second part of that is, somebody chooses to renew well before their renewal date. Can they, and will that roll back their next renewal date to the date that they did renew? Does that make sense?
Yeah, answer the last question first. If you renew early, you will maintain the same renewal date. However, I don't believe you can renew outside of 30 days in advance. The conditions for renewal, courses that have to be taken remain. And so it's more important than ever that licensees take advantage of online learning courses, either the anti-money laundering course and legal update as quickly as they can, because the classrooms obviously have been canceled in the interim and they're going to have to go online for those components.
Aid.
Did that answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, one part that didn't get answered is, can renewal dates be delayed for licensees?
I know that's a question that has been asked, along with, will you take a post-dated check? The answer, to the best of my knowledge, is no. That's better answered by our licensing staff. The email for licensing is lic@recbc.ca. As of today, there is no accommodation from a date point of view or from a payment point of view.
Sure. And Real Estate Council is up to date on the renewals. There's no delays on your end?
There is an email that goes out with every renewal. And whenever you log in onto the site, if you're logging in online, automatically renewing, obviously it's faster than mailing a renewal form. I believe it's probably a 5-day turnaround for the mail. So again, our advice is, the application form says 30 days in advance of your expiry date, you should be making your renewal. If you wait till the last minute, you run the risk of being in limbo. The biggest challenge we've seen from licensees is who leave their brokerage on a Friday and expect to be licensed with their new brokerage on a Monday, and that rarely happens because there isn't enough time for that transition to take place. It'll either be, depending on the category of license, it'll either be 5 or 10 business days that a person should count on in order to ensure that there's no break in the continuity of their licensing.
Thank you very much. That was a complete answer.
Okay, great. We have Anne next. Please go ahead, Anne. Anne, I think you may be muted on your side.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
Has there been any accommodation made for people that have taken the real estate course or the property management course and have not been able to write because their exams were canceled?
No. The exam, the next scheduled exam at UBC, or sorry, through the examination centers or UBC, is in June. I think it's June 15th. There's been no accommodation made. The issue is whether it's on the computer at the computer center in UBC or in an examination center elsewhere in the province, following the guidelines or the requirements of the provincial health officer for distance spacing. And UBC is looking at, we're told, some opportunities to have the exam done online, but invigilation of an online exam creates a whole bunch of other challenges that they're not in a position to meet yet. So more to follow. I think online examinations I wouldn't count on happening unless this COVID situation extends well into the year.
Could they not use the managing brokers as invigilators? Could they not trust us? If you sent them to the managing brokers, both of them are true, or not true or false, but multiple choice. So there's no way they could, as long as they're being watched. They could, so couldn't you use your managing brokers, send the exams to them and have them invigilate them?
I would be happy to pass that suggestion on to our licensing and education people. I know because of the discussion we had in the last couple of days that UBC is examining every opportunity to resolve this issue. At the present time, it's only one exam series that's been canceled. And the question is qualification of invigilators and the ability of invigilators to do it online as opposed to in person. So where the managing broker solution might appear to be a logical one, it isn't likely to be the chosen solution based on the time frame involved and the possibility that we could be writing exams again as early as June. I've made a note of managing broker invigilation, and I will pass that on to our education people.
Thank you.
Just relative to that, the requirement when we get a new licensee coming in that we have an original police report mailed to the council. I'm wondering if we can't have the managing broker certify that it's the original and go with the email of it, and then we have to have a copy on file if we're ever audited. I think that would save a little bit on transmission of any viruses via email or via mail. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that, having the managing broker certify that it is an original copy.
I read some information about police reports and how they are going to be handled. It's not immediately available on my screen. I know the licensing department considered the challenge of, criminal record checks being mailed in and how they were to be handled. And if there was an alternative, the requirements of the criminal record check, I believe, require an original as opposed to a photocopy. And I think that's what you're referring to, is if someone could designate that it is an original copy. I'll put criminal record checks in our list of things to advise as a result of this webinar, and it should come out with answers to other questions that we haven't been able to answer in this brief time that we have. And we have about 25 minutes left.
Marty, I have a question here from someone who also does not have a microphone. So I'm going to read that out from David Mack. There's a lot of information on residential evictions, but not much information out there on commercial leases. We have a commercial landlord with 70% of a strip mall shut down, including restaurants, chiropractors, etc. What rights do commercial tenants and landlords have?
Okay, Jen. I'm sorry. Thank you. That's a great question, and it should have occurred to me. Obviously, the residential tenancy branch has no impact on commercial tenancies, and I don't want to go out on a limb and make a pronouncement because commercial tenancies come under different legislation. I think there's a difference between a restaurant or an incorporated business or partnership having a lease in a mall, for example, than a tenant. Whether or not the provincial government or federal government programs in those situations are going to resolve some of those issues, I do not know. whether a tenant in a commercial situation can be given notice or not, obviously falls outside of the announcements that were made last week in the ministerial order, to the best of my knowledge. However, I know that one of our PSAs has extensive experience in property management on commercial leasing particularly, and I'll be able to get an answer on that today regarding commercials. So would the question best be, what about tenants in commercial premises?
Sorry, Marty, could you repeat that for me?
Sorry, that I just want to confirm what the question was, and I'm sorry, I realized that was written in.
What rights do commercial tenants and landlords have?
Okay, that's fine. We'll flag that for Alex.
There was another question here from Shannon McAllister, and then I believe Dean from UBC would like to speak a moment. So I will read Shannon's question first and then go to Dean. My son just did a criminal record check online and it was sent directly to the school from their site, not a broker or agent. Would that be sufficient, seeing that it is coming directly from them?
I don't know the answer to that. When you say, of course, it's a written question, sent directly to the school, like Sauder School of Business?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was all that was actually typed into there.
Of course, there's no provision for that in the process, regardless of the current situation. It has to be processed by our licensing department. So I doubt that it's sufficient, but again, let's hang on to that one and have licensing look at both.
And sorry for the pause there. Devin wanted to speak about the pre-licensing delays. Devin, could you raise your hand again so that you come up to the top of the list and we'll unmute you?
Hi, Devin, you're unmuted. You can go ahead.
Hi there. So this is Devin from UBC, and we do the pre-licensing program amongst other things. And there was a question on whether or not there would be any delays or extensions to people throughout the course and on course. And basically all students that are currently licensed in a licensing, or currently registered rather, in a licensing course has been given a 3-month extension. So whether that's a 3-month extension to completing their assignments or a 3-month extension for completing their exam, everyone has been given a 3-month extension. Secondly, with respect to exams, the computerized exam center at UBC is closed at this time until further notice. The last paper pencil exam that is scheduled for across the province is April 15th, and we obviously had to cancel that. Those students were moved to a June, I don't recall if it's exactly June 15th or June 18th, something around there, date as well. And again, that's subject to being able to host that exam. Touching very quickly on the availability of managing brokers to administer exams. Remember that a lot of people in pre-licensing have yet to even sign up or enter into any sort of arrangement with a brokerage. So many students don't have a managing broker to turn to. We are looking at other ways to administer the exam, and Marty, I think, touched on it quite aptly. Online invigilation and other types of alternative invigilation is quite challenging, but us at the real estate division and UBC more generally are looking into alternative ways to deliver exams, and we'll have updates as soon as we figure things out.
All right, Dean, thanks for being on the call. The question coming back to notification of cancellation of exams if they were on the paper pencil exam date in April. Everybody registered on that would have received notes from the school explaining the circumstances and saying that they'd been extended to whatever the date is in June.
Yes. Yeah, everybody would have been notified. There were emails sent out and bulletins posted on their course resources webpage. So yes, everyone has been notified.
Great, thank you. And if anybody, as so mysteriously happens, maintains that they haven't been notified, get in touch with their contact information at the Sauder School.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Our office is obviously working from home, but our staff are working remotely, and our email is being answered in a timely way. So anyone that has any further questions can reach out to us. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions while we have Dean primed
Kevin.
up? Kevin?
No, I do have a comment from Shannon again. Shannon, we can unmute you if necessary. So if you want, just raise your hand and we can unmute you. But Shannon wanted to add back to her original question regarding the criminal record check. And she replied and said, no, it's a different school. Shannon has her hand up. Could we unmute Shannon, please?
Shannon, you're unmuted. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, really quickly, Marty, it was a different school. It was just something that I threw out there because he's going to a different school, and because he did his criminal record check right online, they're sending it directly right to the school. So that was the only reason I brought that up. Then it's not going to an agent, to a broker, to somebody, to email, to passing it through. It's coming directly right from the criminal record check office. So that was my option there. The other question I had was just something came on a contract and I've never seen it. I looked for web forms. I couldn't find it. It was called force majeure or majeure. Do you know what that is? I mean, I read it. It's kind of talking about, you know, earthquakes and all that sort of stuff. Is that just another kind of women fancy clause?
The force majeure, another reference to that is act of God. I don't think it's a literal translation, but sometimes contracts attempt to create a situation where through no fault of the parties, a contract can't be concluded. And so the questions that we've been asked are, is it possible to write that into a contract? And we, of course, at the council say we're not lawyers. We don't give legal advice. Go and ask a lawyer. The problem, I think, with all the COVID type clauses, which is what the force majeure would be, is there isn't a one size fits all. And so we're seeing clauses that are being misused under the circumstances. They don't quite fit. Or if a clause is slanted particularly towards a buyer because they're probably written by the buyer's agent, the seller may not fully understand the consequences of agreeing to that clause. And the force majeure would fall into the same category. I think you're right. If you see that in a contract, then you want to advise your seller, or I assume in your case, the seller, to get legal advice as to the meaning of that and the certainty of the contract.
Okay, thank you.
Marty, further to that, we're seeing a lot of clauses out there that may have unintended consequences and may render contracts unenforceable. So if you were contemplating either having your buyer insert a clause like that, please don't be drafting these clauses. They should be done through a lawyer. And if you're seeing a clause come in on one of your listings, again, legal advice before accepting any of those kinds of offers would be in your client's best interest.
Thanks, Jen.
Alex, I believe you had a comment to one of the questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just wanted to step in. There was the question about the commercial tenancies. I responded to an email this morning on this one. It really, at the moment, the provincial government has only made a statement and ministerial order in regards to any tenancies related to the Residential Tenancy Act. So at this time, we're not aware of any statement made by the provincial government relating to commercial tenancies. and thus it appears that nothing's changed, but you may wish to seek legal advice on this matter in relation to commercial tenants. So it's not a full answer, unfortunately, but all we know is what the provincial government's put out, and they haven't made any statement about commercial tenancies.
Thank you, Alex. That was Alex Longson, who is one of our 3 PSAs. He'll be hosting the Strata webinar this afternoon. Next question, he said optimistically.
Okay, David, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Marty. I've seen this pop up on more than one offer coming through, and it seems to be something the lawyers are drafting together. And it's okay if I just read it to you, because to me it's not compliant with RISA, and I just want to see if other brokers have had this kind of put across their table.
Sure, go ahead.
The situation arises due to the COVID-19 virus pandemic that result in the buyer and seller's inability to perform their obligation on the completion date. The completion date shall be extended in the day that is 10 business days following the day that was delayed is resolved. The extended completion date, provided, however, if the extended completion date is greater than 60 days from the original completion date, then unless the parties otherwise agree in writing, this contract will be at an end, and neither party will have any further obligation to the other, and any deposit being held shall be forthwith released to the buyer. The parties agree and acknowledge that in the event the completion date is extended pursuant to the foregoing clause, then the adjustment date and possession date shall also be extended to correspond with the extended completion date. I've seen this come in like 4 times now, and just what's your opinion on it? I don't think it's compliant, but anyway.
Well, it's not a question of compliance, and we're not going to rule on whether it's compliant or not. Our suggestion is that your client who gets an offer with that clause in it should get legal advice. It is obviously subject to the COVID crisis, but I think the concern, as Jennifer mentioned, the unintended consequences, or the buyer who changes their mind for reasons other than COVID, finds another property that they're in love with, and decides that the COVID uncertainty clause is something they can walk away from. So I think it has the potential to create as many problems as it's attempting to solve. So I would get legal advice in every case where I saw that. If the seller was if the seller is going to accept a contract with a clause like that in it, you certainly don't want him to be saying, well, I relied on my licensee to explain to me what would happen. I didn't realize that I couldn't buy another property because of the uncertainty of time. And I think when you start thinking about these contracts stacking up, all of them with COVID clauses in them, that there's a real potential for a mess. Is there an alternative? Can't answer that.
Thank you.
Let me ask a question whether anybody is having problems getting moving companies or moving on time.
Marty, while we're waiting for people, Tawny Stewart did actually text something in, and Tawny had a question. Is anyone facing peer-to-peer challenges of those who are choosing to self-isolate versus those who are trying to continue to provide service?
Peer-to-peer challenges, what is it? Do you have a sense of what that means?
It was written in. I'm thinking maybe it's like, peer pressure, or like, feel like you have to work when they're feeling that maybe they need to self-isolate.
Jen, you're closer to the ground than I am on that.
Yeah, this one is definitely raising some concerns within the association. There are those that are under a service contracts that where sellers are holding them, and buyers, their clients are holding them responsible to perform the duties as per the Schedule A. and those who have elected not to work or may not find themselves under those same service agreements and same contractual obligations. And there's definitely that social moral dilemma, the ethical implications of it. So it is definitely starting to that we're starting to see more activity in terms of, and we really don't support this, but public shaming for those who feel that they need to work and provide the services versus those that are following recommendations and looking for alternatives to face-to-face interactions and doing business in a different way. I'd love to hear if anybody else has any experiences or anything that they can share on it, because it is something that is definitely on our radar.
Sue, you're unmuted. You can go ahead.
Thank you. The only comment I can make to that, because yes, it's happening, I think, in most brokerages, is just to say that the managing broker at our brokerage continues to reinforce that we work not for ourselves totally, we work not for the brokerage, we work for our principals. And if the principal is asking for duties to be fulfilled within the parameters of safe practices, then the realtor has an obligation. And we're hoping that constantly reminding people that the principals are our employers is helping some of that peer criticism diminish somewhat. And we certainly are talking about how these actions are taking place as safely as possible.
And to follow up on that, Sue, I think that one of the things is to realize that if somebody felt like they couldn't provide services or that they wanted to self-isolate as a realtor, that there's options available, that the brokerage could appoint another designated agent. So there's definitely options available in ways of still fulfilling their contractual obligations. Or, you know, council's put out some great resources in terms of communicating with clients early on and discussing the implications. So.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Sue. And
Tawny responded, thank you so much for the feedback. And Richard Lorenzo, sorry if I butchered your name there, had a comment and said that I have to hope that we're all respectful of the individual choices people make at these times. If a service agreement is involved and a licensee does not want to perform, then a cancellation seems to be the way to go on that front.
I see Jim McCoggin's just put a comment in that you may want to read out. Just a time reminder, we have about 5 minutes left in our time slot. So, you know, last couple of questions, depending on the length of the answers, and then we'll wrap it up. Just a reminder that, you know, please submit other questions that you may have. advisor@recbc.ca will reach us, and there will be a summary of the questions asked and answered today, and also a summary of those questions that were asked but not answered.
So Jim said, as the contract is with the brokerage and the managing broker, the managing broker can designate a replacement designated agent who has decided to actively market the property. We also had one come in through email. Norma Miller asked whether or not this recording when it would be made available. We're shooting for next day, so we'll post it on our website, and you'll be able to access it through a YouTube link.
Good. Sorry, access it through.
It'll be, you can link to it from our website. That's the
YouTube. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Other questions? Richard Larendeau has got another comment.
Richard says, thank you, Marty. I am reminded that at various times, council has not wanted to come up with clauses, the assignment issue being perhaps the most recent, and in time, they did come up with the clauses on issues that we face.
Uh, yeah, and I think that's a viewpoint that people have taken. And the Real Estate Council has transitioned from self-regulating body to government crown agency. And in that position as a government agency, we're not in a position to interfere in contracts, to add legal clauses and phrases to the mix. We obviously consult. We have representatives on the Standard Forms Committee, and we consult regularly with BCREA, COVID clauses being the most recent example. I can appreciate why you may look to the council or BCREA for leadership and guidance, but when it comes to legal matters, you're not going to get it from us under the present policies and the structure as a crown agency.
All right, Marty, we're at 2 minutes, and I think I don't see any other questions. Maybe we can wrap up at this point.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for your questions and sharing those insights with each other and with us. Particularly, I'd like to thank staff from the Real Estate Council for assistance in this seminar. A lot of people behind the scenes writing material, anticipating and setting up the mechanics of the meeting. Finally, I'd like to thank Jennifer Lynch and BCREA for participating. We are valued partners in this crisis in support of licensees and consumers. It's truly an unprecedented health and economic crisis that we are all facing together. We are both, BCREA and the Council, working hard to keep you informed. Please continue to visit both of our sites, Real Estate Council of BC and BCREA's COVID-19 web pages for resources and information. And finally, if any questions have been left unanswered or you think of some after the fact, don't hesitate to contact us. advisor@recbc.ca is one of the many addresses that will reach the Real Estate Council. With that, I'd like to draw this webinar to a close. Thank you very much.